Hello, and welcome to the session. In the next 25 minutes, we'll talk about a recent important innovation in the malware ecosystem, namely that malicious actors are using the Bitcoin blockchain for spreading command and control information. And the issue with this is that this makes it very difficult to detect and mitigate this vector with the technology we currently have. In this talk, we show you how this mechanism works in the Pony malware. We show you how the actors learned and innovated over the course of a year. And we tell you how we were successfully able to take over the operation. When we talk about cybersecurity and malware in particular, we have to realize that this is a continuous game of cat and mouse. Each time defenses get good enough to make a difference and affect the bottom line, the criminals tune it up a notch and innovate. And this has been going on for the past 25 years. This evolution goes on in waves and has occurred in different domains. For instance, when we look at how malware is written, we saw the emergence of things such as encryption, polymorphism, or metamorphism starting from the 1990s. We also saw changes in the way that malware talks to the botnet or to the botnet master. While initial malware used Internet Relay Chat to receive and send information, IRC stands out quite a bit in normal network traffic. So very soon, this malware adopted HTTP and HTTPS-based command control channels. We also saw changes in how malware prevents from being analyzed. So we saw anti-debugging and anti-virtualization techniques emerging the stage. And there has been innovations in the way that addressing has been done. So while static IP addresses can be locked easily and domain names are routinely being seized, in the 2000s we saw the emergence of domain generation algorithms, or DGAs in short. And a DGA generates a large number of domain names that are valid only for a short time interval. And behind any of these, the CNC server could be hiding. So in order to take it down, you would have to block all of these domain names, which makes it very cumbersome to do. When we look at this, we might conclude that this situation has been more or less static for the past 5 years. However, there has been the next step in the sequence of steps, a new innovation that we need to be aware of. In 2017, the Kerber malware adopted a new principle of addressing. It exchanged CNC information via the blockchain. This is now being adopted by Pony and other malware and becomes much more widespread. And it is important that we as defenders are aware of this evolution step and that we build new types of defenses to detect and mitigate this vector. If you're interested in learning more about Kerber, we refer you to a report from our lab where we study how the malware works, the TTP used, and how the infrastructure works. You can find the URL to this report here on the slide. When we look at our portfolio of security defenses, there are 3 main angles that we use to deal with malware and botnet infections today. If you have a domain name that you know it's malicious, you block it. If you have a malware sample that uses a DGA, you take it apart and you study the algorithm, and from it you predict all domain names it will ever generate. And this list you can now put into your DNS server, block it, create alerting rules, and so on. You can also detect and mitigate based on the behavior of a malware. So while you might be occasionally mistyping a domain name, it is very unlikely that a client requests thousands of high-entropy domain names, and the bulk of which don't exist. So these so-called NX domain lookups, if a large number of them occurs, this is typically a sign for a malware infection. Finally, you also can mitigate a botnet by finding, locating, and seizing the physical infrastructure. If you take down the CNC server itself, the botnet typically will fall silent. The work that we're presenting in this talk is the result of an international cooperation between Fujitsu Systems Integration Laboratories in Tokyo, Japan, and the Hasso-Plattner Institute for Digital Engineering in Potsdam, Germany. My name is Christian Dohr. I will be walking with you through the first part of this presentation. How does malware coordination by the Bitcoin blockchain work? It's quite simple. You make transactions on the blockchain and you encode into the payment how much is being paid, by whom and when, the information that you want to transmit. How's it being done in Pony? The transaction itself signals the CNC information. This value is encoded in the amount of money that is being paid between a sending wallet and a signaling wallet. In this example, the Bitcoin address starting with 1N94R is the sending wallet, and the Bitcoin address starting with 1BKEG is going to be the signaling wallet. And if we have the entrainment amount of 23,950 Satoshis, if we translate this into hexadecimal, that is 5D8E, we chunk this up into 2 parts, and we again translate this back into a numerical value, 93,142. We now have the first 2 parts of the IP address if we flip these 2 values. Let us look at the second transaction value, 52,736 or CE00. Again, you split it up, you get 206 and 0, and you flip these two values to get the second part of the IP address. So now clients are monitoring specific wallets on the blockchain. They're retrieving the last payments. And from the last two, they are decoding this in the following manner to now obtain the CNC IP address 142.93.0 and 206. Why two transactions? While you could signal it in one transaction, the money necessary to transfer this information would be astronomically high. So by using two transactions, you keep the cost for maintaining the CNC mechanism relatively low. So when we look at the three main angles that we introduced for how we deal with malware and botnet infections, we see that we now have a significant problem in our hands from this latest innovation step, because much of what we have been doing doesn't work anymore. Let's look at option one, predicting domain names and stopping them. Well, there isn't nothing to predict anymore. So there is not a malware algorithm we can take apart by looking at the sample. All of the information is being exchanged on the blockchain. And I cannot predict in the future what is going to be the next payment that somebody makes on the blockchain. So as soon as I do something, the criminal can make a new payment, and immediately all of the bots are updating to the new information. I also cannot remove anything from the blockchain because the blockchain has been designed to be this way. So option one completely goes out of the window. How about option two, detecting lookup patterns, especially these telltale NX domain lookups? Well, there isn't any DNS lookups at all. There isn't a high entropy domain name that is being queried. The blockchain reveals directly the IP address. So there's not going to be any DNS requests to something that I can track, nor is there any NX domains. So option two is also out of the window. How about option three, locating and seizing the physical infrastructure? Well, it depends. In case of the Takeover malware, we saw that the adversaries were using Tor to hide the CNC server location, and depending on how this is being done, this might be also then difficult to do. So we tracked the Pony malware authors for the course of 1 year, and we continuously observed them, and we saw that they went through many rounds of redesign and continuous improvement. For instance, they experimented with different tactics for reaching the wallet. They added more APIs in order to make it more resilient. We also saw that they were using different techniques and changing them over time for signaling the IP address. We refer to these as the time lag and the fee order strategy later on, and we will discuss more details about that. And we saw changes in when and how they were making transactions. So they changed time zones in order to have lower fees for the upkeep of the infrastructure. Two of these Tsuyoshi will discuss with you in the following in more detail. If you're interested in an in-depth treatment beyond that, you can download our full paper here below on the URL. Not only did the signaling change, but also the inner workings of the malware and the CNC server itself. So I said two transactions are needed to signal the IP address, and this was thus done for cost reasons. And if you have two transactions, you have the challenge that these need to be in the correct order, otherwise the IP address would not be correct. So if transaction 2 would finish before transaction 1, you have an issue because now the client querying the blockchain would decode it and go to the wrong IP address for the CNC server. But you have another problem. If you have only one transaction that is being included, the last two transactions would give you the wrong result because the clients would now decode transaction 1 from the new update and transaction 2 from the previous update as the current location of the CNC server. So why would this happen? Even if transaction 1 is being made before transaction 2, it could be that a miner doesn't include it for now. And even if transaction 1 and 2 go into the blockchain in the correct order, there could be a delay that they are not placed into consecutive blocks. So they may be placed minutes or maybe even hours apart. And during this time, any client going to the blockchain will decode the wrong IP address. So the obvious question that the adversaries ask themselves is, how do you get transactions in the blockchain in the correct order and into consecutive blocks without really spending too much money on it? So why is money an issue here? Let us first see how the blockchain works. In the blockchain, people are creating new blocks, and these blocks contain transactions that are currently being made and are cryptographically linked to the previous blockchain blocks beforehand. And this work on the blockchain, where people continuously mine blocks, is not done for free. People don't contribute their computing power for free, but they get a reward when they create a new block. And the money that they get from it is being paid by people who are making transactions. So if Anna is sending Bob some money, she pays a fee for making these transactions on the Bitcoin network. And the higher the fee that you offer for this transaction, the higher the incentive is to the miner to include it in the block that they're currently mining, and the more likely is to get in. So fees being paid makes a difference. Let us now look in more detail on how the adversary used the CNC mechanism of signal via the blockchain in practice.
Thank you, Christian. My name is Yoshi Taniguchi from Fujitsu System Integration Laboratories. From here, let's see how the adversary tried to evolve their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and let's learn about 2 case studies based on the actual adversary's behaviors. The first case study is that the adversary coped with the market turmoil influenced by the Bitcoin halving. The upper line graph represents the fees which the adversary set on transactions in order to update their CNC IPs. The lower line graph represents the time confirmed by the miners. I consider the time as a numerical value and plotted. The Bitcoin halving reduced the profit of the miners, then fees temporarily soared. The fee soar means the increase of the cost from the adversary's side. The adversary had to cope with the fee soar in order to protect their profit. Before the Bitcoin halving, they basically updated their CNC IP during European working time. After the Bitcoin halving, they shifted their trading time from working time to midnight. They avoided busy time in the market in order to save their cost. Here, please attention. After the Bitcoin halving, they updated their CNC IP from 3 to 5 European time. In order to realize our takeover, which is the main topic of this presentation, it is essential to grasp the timing of CNC update. The second case study is that the adversary tried to confirm 2 transactions in the correct order as quickly as possible, as Christian explained in the previous slide. The adversary tried 2 strategies, time lag and fee order. In this slide, I'd like to explain about the time lag strategy. The purpose of the time lag strategy is to certainly control the order of confirmation. They simply conduct a second transaction after the confirmation of the first transaction. This means that 2 transactions are confirmed in different blocks. In the blockchain principle, a block is generated every 10 minutes. The program of the time lag strategy is the time lag between the confirmation of the first and second transaction. The time lag is over approximately 10 minutes. If the second transaction is not confirmed, the CNC update is not completed. This, so to speak, downtime reduces the profit of the adversaries. Next, let me explain about the fee order strategy. The motivation of fee order strategy is to avoid the time lag. They tried to confirm 2 transactions in the same block. Since miners in the blockchain prior to confirm transaction, which set higher fee on, and the adversary set higher fee on the first transaction compared to the second transaction. Nobody can understand the relation between fees and confirmation, and this uncertainty is the program of the fee order strategy. Okay, we actually observed adversaries' trial and error of fee order strategy. Let's see the trial and error in this slide. The upper line graph represents the difference of blocks in the first and second transaction and downtime. The lower line graph represents the fees which the adversary set on transaction. The adversary basically selected the time lag strategy. We observed over 2 hours downtime. This means that the CNC update was not completed during 2 hours, and the malware could not decode correct CNC IP, and the adversary could not control the malware. 2 hours is very long time, so this is a big program from the adversary's side. Then they started conducting the trial and error of P-order strategy since June 2020. While they conduct 2 transactions in the same block, and they set higher fee on the first transaction compared to the second transaction. It seems that they succeeded in realizing the fee order strategy. However, they returned back to the time lag strategy. They might not be sure to control the order of confirmation based on the fee order strategy. From here, let's move on to the main core part of this presentation. Let me explain about our takeover mechanism. The mechanism for hiding C&C IP in the blockchain by the adversary was ingenious. Once transactions are confirmed by the miners, nobody can take down the confirmed transaction. And these trades were not a crime, of course not money laundering. They simply moved their Bitcoin from their own Bitcoin address to their own Bitcoin address. And abused blockchain API is legitimate. It is difficult to risk communication as malicious. The basic idea of our takeover is to inject transactions hiding our single server IP to the Bitcoin address controlled by the adversaries as the rendezvous point from malware communication. Before the takeover, we carefully tested the feasibility of the takeover. Based on the dynamic analysis in the sandbox, we confirmed that the malware made use of incoming money without checking where the incoming money comes from. Therefore, anybody can inject any IP address to the rendezvous point. We consider this as design mistake. In addition, from the ASCAR consideration point of view, we confirm that if the malware cannot download required DLL, the safeguard mechanism of the malware deleted malware itself. Therefore, our single server did not download any exfiltrated files from infected clients, and shutdown infection realized. Here, please remember, cybersecurity is a game of cat and mouse. Of course, we anticipated their evasive behavior. From the next slide, we will show a game of cat and mouse, offense and defense, and actual evasive behavior by the adversaries. Okay, let's see a game of cat and mouse based on the actual offense and defense. We conducted first takeover on August 14. As I explained in case studies, we grasped the timing of C&C update. And during the offense and defense, and the adversary basically used time lag strategy. They suspended their malicious activity for 2 days and reset C&C. So we waited and saw the activity for a day, and they updated their C&C. So we conducted second takeover on August 17. After our second takeover, they changed the pattern of C&C IP update from midnight to working time, and they updated their C&C. After that, we conducted our third takeover on August 19, and it seemed that they stopped their malicious activity. However, they redesigned their C&C mechanism and restarted their malicious activity from September 1st. Okay, let me summarize our takeover. During the battle of occupying malware rendezvous point, we conducted 3 times takeover. And we estimated the mitigation of the damage by our takeover. Before our takeover, the adversary updated their C&C once a day. And we realized malware offline for 70 days. We identified 275 infections at the first takeover. And according to our cited report, average $400 is stolen per account during credential theft. And therefore, we estimated that we prevented $2 million by our takeover. Okay, let's see new she mechanism by the adversaries. The mechanism for hiding she IP in the blockchain was ingenious. However, the mechanism has design mistake. We made use of the design mistake. We succeeded in taking over. Our takeover forced the adversary to suspend their malicious activity, and we anticipated the evasive behavior. So in fact, it took 17 days to redesign and implement the new she mechanism by the adversaries. Okay, this is the answer slide to the question, how did adversaries evade our takeover? The adversary changed rendezvous point from the receiving Bitcoin address to the sending Bitcoin address. This enabled the malware to download only transactions whose sending Bitcoin address is controlled by the adversaries. Simultaneously, this prevented us from taking over. We could not take over anymore. On the other hand, even if they identify our disturbance, they did not change Bitcoin addresses. It might be tough work for adversaries to synchronize the malware rendezvous point and changing Bitcoin addresses. So we could track their malicious activity by monitoring Bitcoin operation. It still be the vulnerability. Although the adversary coped with the difficulty of evading our takeover, they eventually gave up the attack infrastructure. They disclosed the vulnerability of Bitcoin search. The Bitcoin search means the increase of the cost from the adversary side. The value of Bitcoin increased by 5 times compared to the value as of our takeover. When the cost was not worth it, they gave up. And now, they suspended their malicious activity. However, if the value of Bitcoin is dropped, there is a possibility that they restart their malicious activity in the future. Please continue to be careful regarding this emerging attack. Let's see the concluding remarks and takeaways. Blockchain-based she is the next step of criminal TTPs. We could study how the adversaries improved their TTPs over time. A simple design mistake allowed us to take over their operation until they redesigned. This mechanism was ingenious, however vulnerable to Bitcoin search. As a result, they gave up. After evading our takeover, we could track their malicious activity by monitoring Bitcoin behavior. We hope that our findings and insight will be useful for security people against this emerging attack. That's all for today. Thank you for coming to our session. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask the question. Thank you.